Welcome to the Federal. Today we have Mr. Kanwal Sibal, the former Foreign Secretary, and we will discuss about the upcoming US visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Sir, my first question to you is, why is the meeting important and what are the likely issues that will come up for discussion?
Well, the meeting is important for a couple of reasons, or more than a couple of reasons. One, of course, is that this is a state visit. The second time that Prime Minister Modi has been invited for a state visit. And he's also going to address the US Congress. Now, if you see this in the background of all the attacks that the US media, think tanks, the strategy community, the civil society in general, foundations have been against India on democracy backsliding, minority persecution, curbing of press freedoms, religious freedoms. Inviting Prime Minister Modi in the background of all this, after all, that is also part of the larger US establishment and society, says a couple of things. One is that this has had no impact really on policymakers, who may also have some reservations, but they see the bigger picture. And they want to make sure that India remains on their side in the churn that we see in geopolitics, especially with the rise of China. If the United States has to have a serious Indo-Pacific policy, or I would even say an Asian policy, then India is absolutely critical to that. And I think the US strategists have begun to understand this. The second is that there was a lot of pressure on us, and this came also from the administration, to dilute our ties with Russia, not buy oil from Russia, reduce our military dependence on Russia, and they're very open about it. But India has stood its ground. In fact, from buying 1% of our oil from Russia, it is now almost 38–40%. Our military ties remain stable. And our political dialogue with Russia is being maintained at the highest level. We are members of the SCO, we are members of BRICS. I think the United States has begun also to understand that if they have to deal with India, they have to take into account what India considers its legitimate national interest. It cannot be either or. So in other words, there is a degree of growing equality in ties. We cannot ever be equal because the United States is the biggest military power, the biggest economic power, and they are used to alliances and dominating others. But I think there is a change in the US position. The other, of course, is that the United States is now our biggest economic partner, $190 billion of trade in goods and services. And I think there's a big potential ahead. And then finally, in the whole area of critical and emerging technologies, the US National Security Advisor took the lead, along with our own National Security Advisor, to open up cooperation in this sector, involving the private sector as well as the academic and research institutions. Now, this will take time, but this is a big step forward because a lot of work lies ahead. And Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, is in India currently. And yesterday he addressed the CII. I was present there. And the entire outlook is positive, though I said that a lot of work lies ahead.
So how has India maintained this crucial balance between Russia and the US? What has changed?
No, I explained in my earlier answer that India has its own view of its national interests. India has never been part of any alliance and does not visualize being part of any alliance, though that does not mean that if on certain specific issues or challenges, our views are aligned with that of the United States, we can have a strong partnership as we are having. We are members of Quad. We are, in fact, deepening our commitment to Quad. We fully support the Indo-Pacific project. We have these major naval exercises, the Malabar exercises with the United States, which include now Japan and Australia. We have, at the bilateral level, a lot of exercises with the United States, including one very recently, just 100 kilometers away from the India-Tibet border. United States has supported us, backed us during the Galwan conflict. And they have stated that they consider Arunachal Pradesh as part of India. So there is clearly, therefore, they value their strategic relationship with India going ahead, given, as I said, the challenge that United States is facing, especially from China. So this gives us room for maneuver. And United States realistically is beginning to accept this if they want to deepen their ties with India. Of course, their hope is that as time goes forward and we become closer and closer to the United States, then even if effectively we are not an ally, we will become a sort of a quasi-ally. And our relationship with the Russia and others will inevitably get relatively weakened. So we'll be in their orbit, more or less. But mind you, this may be a calculation, but in the time ahead, India will be becoming stronger and stronger, economically, militarily, and therefore we would have even more room for making choices. And we'll be able to deal with the United States much more as an equal going ahead. But nevertheless, at the moment, it is to our advantage to have close ties with the United States, because we need those, for our economic modernization, our progress, economic progress, especially access to technology, and of course, meeting the China challenge, which United States also is facing.
So China is asserting itself in the region. How do you think China will view this meeting?
I don't think they will be. Yes, they will note that this is happening. But then, Xi Jinping and President Biden also have had conversations more than once. United States continues to say we don't want a conflict with China. In fact, now they say we're not going to decouple ourselves from China. We'll only de-risk ourselves, which means the $700 billion of trade that exists will remain intact, though in sensitive areas, in high technology areas, United States will start blocking access that China has hitherto been getting to US technology and US companies. So in other words, United States-China ties as of today, despite all their differences, are much stronger than US ties with India. So therefore, why should China be perturbed by closer India-US ties? Because for 30 years, they have had very, very close ties with the United States. And in fact, it is because of the United States and its allies that China is today the formidable economic power that it is. So I don't see why, or at least we don't need to bother about what China thinks about this.
So Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently completed 9 years in power. How do you look at the foreign policy of this government?
I think they have built very successfully on many of the initiatives that were taken earlier by previous governments, because foreign policy is a continuum. It's not as if it gets invented with every government, because foreign policy is based on many factors. Your geographical position, your neighbors, your foreign policy challenges, your economic strength, your military strength. So all this actually gives you room for maneuver in foreign policy. I mean, look at China. China today is challenging the United States is because in 30 years, it has built itself economically tremendous. On a few things, for example, United States. The opening with the United States came at the time of, if you like, Manmohan Singh, when we signed the civilian nuclear deal. But if you look at the depth and range of ties that India has with the United States today, it is far greater. So Prime Minister Modi has capitalized on that. With regard to the American diaspora, not only in the United States, but elsewhere in UK, Australia, and others, here the Prime Minister has given a new life to our relations with the diaspora. It instilled a lot of pride and self-confidence in them by making them aware of what India under Modi is achieving domestically. Number three, we were non-aligned in the past, fine. We were interested in South-South cooperation, but Modi has now taken the lead in terms of the global South. And in the G20, we see how the Modi government is emphasizing the agenda and the interests and the preferences of the global South when we deal with global issues in the G20. And this is being recognized. And this gives us a lot of room for maneuver in foreign policy. And I think it's very wise of him, which has not been done before. He has, for example, had summit meetings with the Pacific Island states. He's had summit meetings with the Caribbean states. So this focus on small countries, in some of these there are Indian populations too, it is to build support for India internationally. And then, of course, you see in the whole vaccine diplomacy, the manner in which India has dealt with the COVID issue. This has earned us tremendous goodwill in developing countries, because they saw India, despite its 1.434 billion population, was not being selfish as some of the Western countries were, and was willing to come to the assistance of these countries at the time of a totally unprecedented pandemic. And then in terms of digitalization of the Indian economy, which is a domestic issue, but beyond that, it has certainly had international repercussions. Now people have begun to note that the progress India has made in digitalization and the advantages of that in direct benefit schemes, in the whole Aadhaar thing, the unified identity system, and of course inclusiveness and bringing development to the lowest level. Now this is very attractive for the developing countries. The World Bank and IMF have all taken note of that. And this again gives us an image abroad as India, which is a provider of public goods. Unlike in the past, when India was aid dependent, and our entire effort was to make sure that aid continued to flow from the World Bank, other international organizations. Then on climate change, an issue on which India was always on the back foot. Now India has taken the leadership, and with credibility, because Modi has this huge program of renewables. We have already achieved that initial target of 175 gigawatts. Now it is 500 gigawatts. And then he has introduced a certain lexicon with regard to climate change in general, lifestyle, things like that, where if you want to address the issue of climate change, then you have to moderate your lifestyle, you have to change your lifestyles, and these kind. And then in terms of marking the importance of India as a civilization and its contribution to human civilization. And that is this whole Yoga Day and his emphasis on traditional medicines and stuff like that. That is also intended to fortify India's image internationally in various directions. He has paid earlier we were paying attention to our neighbors, no doubt, but he's paying much more attention to our neighbors. Whether it's Nepal, we saw the Nepalese Prime Minister who came recently, or Bangladesh, or Sri Lanka. We are the biggest donor of assistance to Sri Lanka when it was facing this terrible crisis. Maldives, we have changed the situation on the ground. So with Africa, we are continuing to pay a great deal of attention to Africa. He's had these Africa summits in India, and we are reaching out to Latin America. And then since we have the presidency of the G20 as well as of the SCO, we are capitalizing on that in order to put India on the global map. So I think in many, many ways, as I said, well, then very, very important, Middle East, West Asia. Yes, initiatives were taken even during Manmohan Singh's time, but look at the total change in our ties with the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Even with Israel, now we have the I2U2, India, Israel, UAE, and US working together, and now another quad, India, UAE, United States, and Saudi Arabia. And mind you, and the last point is that Modi has been attacked in India and by Western organizations as being anti-Muslim, persecuting Muslims, minorities, and this and that. But the core of conservative Islam is paying tremendous respect to him. They have given him the highest order, highest national honors. And look at the kind of blooming of ties with these countries, especially with the UAE, but also with Saudi Arabia under the Modi government. So the perspectives on Modi and his government and his foreign policy have changed a great deal in India's favor.
So BJP has used foreign policy as a tool in domestic politics. How do you look at this strategy to attract more people towards it?
No, I think that's the wrong way of looking at it. Now, if you want foreign investment, which is critical in terms of our economic growth, and that economic investment, if it is to come from United States or Europe or wherever else, it is directly related to the Indian economy. So if he's wooing certain countries, strengthening ties with them, meeting their business leaders, as he does, it is all meant for building strength at home economically. So there is that linkage, but it is a normal linkage. Every country is doing it. Every country is doing it. In fact, look at the UK, it wants Indian investment. France wants Indian investment. Why? Because they want to deal with problems at home, economic issues at home. They want to preserve the economic growth. Then if the other countries want entry into the Indian market, then there is an interplay of you give me something, I give you something. So again, there is a relationship between your domestic issues and your external relations. Now, when it comes to the diaspora, they're not going to vote in India. We still haven't given them the right to vote. If they're abroad, they have to come to India. And how many people are involved? So when he goes and meets the diaspora, it is not as if he wants to build his image at home. His image at home is going to be based on what he does at home and what the voting public in rural India, semi-urban India, urban India feel about him. They are not going to be told by what people in Houston or New York or elsewhere think about Modi. But his view is different. That just as the Chinese use their diaspora. In fact, a lot of China's economic growth and all has been as a result of participation by the Chinese diaspora. So if the Indian diaspora can be mobilized to look at India in a different light, in a positive light, because they're all highly qualified people, many of them are in the sciences and in all advanced areas. Look at people of Indian origin in NASA and in many of these areas. Look at the CEOs of the top companies, US companies. So if they can in some way help shape, contribute to the Indian economy, because they're getting a different picture of India and its leadership, because of the personality of Modi, what's wrong with that? But the thing is, when he goes and he has these huge events and there's this great applause and hero worshipping of Modi, then I think people at home, the opposition, they start getting worried. But I think they should look at it realistically. There are other elements to it. It is not building his image at home, though of course, if the people, especially in urban areas, see our leader being feted and honored abroad, it does add to his image. But at the end of the day, if this was really the core issue, then why would BJP have lost in Karnataka? I mean, the dynamics of Indian elections is very different.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Mr. Sibal. It was a pleasure talking to you.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.